That was the scene in Iraq's parliament building on Monday as followers of the Shia leader Muqtada al-Sadr continued their sitting protest for government reform. Hi, I'm Femi OK. On today's stream, political deadlock in Iraq. Despite holding parliamentary elections last year, lawmakers have been unable to agree on who will run the country's next government. And now protests from rival Shia political groups are threatening to deepen divisions in the country. So, what will it take for Iraq's government to work? That's our discussion today. You're very welcome to be part of it on YouTube. Time to meet your panel. Welcome, Raed, Ammar, Lahi. So good to have all three of you on the stream. Raed, welcome back to the stream. Please remind our audience who you are, what you do.
I work with the organization that was founded by Jamal Khashoggi, Democracy for the Arab World Now, or DAWN.
Good to have you. Ammar, nice to have you on the stream. Please introduce yourself to our audience around the world.
Well, I'm an Iraqi journalist. I work with the French news agency AFP, based in Baghdad.
Good to have you. And Lahi, welcome to the stream. Please introduce yourself to our viewers.
Thank you for having me. I am the senior Iraq analyst for the International Crisis Group.
Thanks, all of you guests. I'm going to get you to talk to each other. Audience, you can also talk to our guests as well. I am surrounded right now, Ammar, by scenes of Iraq's parliament building. It does not look like business as usual. I see a sitting, I see people. Can you explain, as we show these pictures, what happened and what it normally would look like in parliament? And is this an extraordinary occurrence? Can you start? Can you help us, Ammar?
Well, yeah, for the first time, I've seen also similar images where you can see vendors selling inside the parliament, where this place is supposed to be place of cooking all the draft laws and also all the place where the politicians are fighting for their share of cake normally, and it's behind the scene. For the first time, it became a place where the people can visit and can share it with the politician and actually control it for a period of time. And it seems they are staying there for time that is not even expected for how long it's going to be.
Lahi, when you look at those scenes of the men chanting and dancing and flags waving, what comes to mind?
Well, I mean, it's interesting to see that.
Lahi, go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting to see that Iraqis are actually celebrating taking over the parliament building. And from what you can see in those pictures, they're not violent. What they're happy about is to be sitting in the seats of the political elites that decide so many decisions for them that they don't feel a part of. And the main sign of that was the turnout in the October 2021 election that has actually sparked this crisis, where only about 40% formally, probably even less, of the Iraqis actually showed up to the polls.
Right. Can you explain, from your perspective, why you think the protest and the sitting has now spread into the parliament building? What was the catalyst for that?
Honestly, it is extraordinary to see these pictures, but it's not surprising. And it's not the first time that we have seen, similar manifestations of how the majority of Iraqis reject the current political regime in Iraq. There has been very, very strong pushback against the foundations of the current Iraqi government that was installed by the US in 2003. There is pushback by Shia and Sunnis and seculars and Kurds and Christians from Iraq who oppose the idea of running the country based on sectarian divisions and who oppose foreign intervention, whether foreign interventions came from the US or from Iran or from Saudi Arabia or Israel or wherever. So we have seen, manifestations of this like nationalist Iraqi movement, anti-sectarian Iraqi movement throughout the years, and this is the most recent manifestation. I think the supporters of Muqtada al-Sadr are a sample of how the majority of Iraqis feel about the current political situation in Iraq. There is resentment to the corruption, to the dysfunctionality of the system, and there are calls for a complete, rehaul of the system. It's not really a fight over who's the next prime minister. It's a bigger question. It's a question of governance, a question of representation, and the question of how to fix many of the root causes that have led the country in the wrong direction.
Right. I'm just thinking, not even the fight over who's the next prime minister, but how about who's the next president? Like, you have to have a president in order to have a prime minister, correct? So the whole system has broken down, has it not?
It has. I mean, honestly, if you ask me, I think the system has been broken for 2 decades now.
Yeah.
It hasn't really worked from the beginning. But yes, the fact that we have to have a president who's Kurdish, a prime minister who's Shia, and the head of a parliament who's Sunni, and the elite who have run these, arrangements behind closed doors, have not represented the will of the Iraqi people. They have not represented the interests of the Iraqi people. They have been beholden to foreign powers like Iran or the US or other foreign powers. So this is really a representation of a lot of resentment that's coming out.
Yes, Lahib, and then Ammar, we'll come back to you. Lahib, you go first. Go ahead.
So I agree with what Rad is saying, of course, but I think that the reason why this crisis is happening now and why it seems to depart from previous ones, and especially from the Tishreen protests, is actually that these demonstrations are very much elite-driven. For sure, there are people on the streets that are able to voice their frustration as well. But the reason why they're occupying parliament right now is because Sadr has encouraged that. And I think that at the moment, the tensions that are playing out are a type of show of force on part of the political elites that are no longer able to come to a consensus like they have done every election since 2005. And Sadr that was the one, we could say, that in a way instigated this.
I'm really glad you said that. Can I just pause you for a moment, because I want our audience to be almost up to speed as you are on Muqtada al-Sadr. So we put together some points, but can you add to them as we share them with our audience about him, so they know a little bit more about where he's come from, why he's so important in this conversation? So we start with him being a populist Shia leader. What more do you want to add to that?
Sure. So, I mean, the reason why within what we in Iraq sometimes call the Shia house, why Sadr kind of stands apart from many of the other Shiite leaders, is really his background. So first of all, he is the son of a very then influential cleric. He is one himself, and although he might not have the credentials for being a Grand Ayatollah, for instance, he has great political ambitions, as we have seen. And the other main difference is also that apart from the others, many of whom during the Saddam regime spent years in exile, whether in Iran or the West, Sadr's family were largely remaining in Iraq. And so he also draws his populist credentials from this context.
Okay.
He's also, I would say, the one Shiite leader that probably has the most loyal base, and the reason for that is because many of his voters or his constituents come from a very poor kind of socioeconomic background.
All right, let me just bring back Ammar. Ammar, you have been reporting from the Parliament building, and I want to go via your Twitter feed because the pictures you've been taking are fascinating. So here on Twitter, I've got Sadrists established service tents to provide food and drink for a sit-in in front of Parliament building. It seems that it's going to be going on or taking days, and these pictures are fascinating. This is not an accidental sit-in. There's a plan here. Tell us more about the protesters and who is siding with al-Sadr, and there are also counter-protests at the same time.
Well, Sadr, I think he is the only man in the country I want to describe his follower, his supporter, as a blind supporter. And if you ask them to throw themselves in the river, they would do. This is how I felt when I'm among his supporters. And honestly, I would say he is the only one has this sort of supporter. And you know, this protest it started at around 9:30 in the morning. I was with them, and we broken the main key walls to the parliament around 10:30, and until 5. And Iraq is really hot country, and that day it was almost 50 degrees. And I promise you, inside the green zone, there was no one single bottle of water. I don't know how these people survived, but there was just little water for, you know, like watering the sun grass. That's the only access for food, only access for water. Sorry, there was no single food.
Sure.
I haven't eaten that day. So basically, Sadr is an organization. It's one of the most powerful men also, and he has so many institutes, and he has this procession during Ashura, for example. He has hundreds, probably thousands of procession that serve food and drink for the the days of Muharram and Ashura.
Amma, this is super organized. I want to go back to the point that we started with, is that Iraq's government being broken, it's not able to move forward, it's not able to govern. What does that mean? Right, I'd love you to have a listen to Marcin, who spoke to us a little bit earlier about the impact of there being no government for at least 10 months, and many would argue for even longer. Here's Marcin at the end of her video. Would you respond, please?
Iraq has been without a government for 10 months, and this has had a huge impact on the everyday life of citizens. One of the ways in which it has impacted citizens is that the government hasn't been able to provide better services, to work on the issues of unemployment and poverty that continue to accumulate and make life difficult for Iraqis. In addition to that, there's issues of foreign policy. Because Iraq doesn't have a government, they are unable to put on a unified response to incursions on sovereignty, as we saw happen with the bombings in northern Iraq.
I agree to all of these points. All of the points are valid. The counterpoint is that Iraq also has a dysfunctional government that is unable to put a unified voice against foreign intervention or domestic challenges, even at the time that Iraq has a prime minister and a president. We saw that in the last 2 decades. The country has been one of the most corrupt in the entire world, according to the Transparency International's Index of Corruption. Iraq has produced more than $2 trillion of oil in the last 2 decades. $2 trillion. That's more money than most of the Arab world combined, producing any sort of resources. But Iraqis are still suffering with no basic services, no electricity, no water, no education, no healthcare. So really, I think criticizing the gap in governance is valid. But the gap in governance is not coming out of nowhere. It's coming out of Iraqis getting to a point where they are asking for change. They understand that if there is a new prime minister with the status quo, the situation will continue to be the same as it was in the last 2 decades.
Let me just bring in the voice of Sheikh Ali Ward. He's famous as a protester. He's been protesting for many years. He's now 80 years old, and he explains why he continues to go out and protest. I'll let him explain that. That's one point for why the government in Iraq is broken. Hear his perspective.
Our people have been destroyed. Since 2003 and until this day, nothing has changed. Politicians have not made any reforms. Human beings should use their brains. I say to our brothers in the parliament and the leaders, please use your brains. The people suffer from unemployment and a lack of health services. Nothing has changed since 2003. Nothing. I have participated in every protest.
You can hear his frustration right there. I want to bring in another area of concern for why Iraq is not working, and that is infighting between Shia politicians. Lahib, can you explain to us why that is such an important factor right now in government not being able to be formed properly?
Well, the main reason for that is that this time when we had elections in October 2021, it was based on a new election law that some parties did not read very well in terms of what the outcome of that system would be. So the one who benefited from that was Muqtada al-Sadr and his party that came up highest with 74 seats. And then was also a Sunni alliance and the biggest Kurdish party, the KDP. And the rival Shia factions, among which the former Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki won some over 30 seats, but was way off from the number of seats that he is able to garner in the past. And the reason for this is that the Shia house has expanded inside parliament over the last few years, and especially due to the war on ISIS that saw several parties linked to paramilitary groups come in to the political scene. And so now, you know, the amount of actors that are trying to share the cake of state revenues, because this is really what it is about. What Marcin was talking about, was what Raad was mentioning. The reason why the oil money does not benefit the people is because all political actors in Iraq use government and parliament as a way of expanding their own patronage networks. Usually, they've been dividing up government or cabinet seats among them in order to get access to ministries from which they can extract revenues, while siphoning off a big deal of it, while giving only very little to the people. And then on top of that, not investing in infrastructure that Iraq badly needs, such as electricity, such as healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, what I found very enlightening in a way, listening to this man, is that there's also in this crisis, which is a political one among elites more than anything else, and one specifically, I would say, between Sadr and his main rival, Nouri al-Maliki, is that they're also taking advantage of people's frustration. Okay, this is a way for people to voice their grievances from inside the parliament building, but the reality is that this time around the demonstrations are not instigated, organically from the bottom, which we saw in 2019, for instance. This is a way for Sadr to say that this is a people's revolution, which it is not really. This is a way for him to escalate the situation vis-a-vis his rivals after he withdrew all his parliamentarians without actually violent means, at least so far. And so what we've seen on the other side...
It was way to revenge. Sadr, in his step of this, it was just a revenge of his rival. This is exactly what happened. It was, I can tell you, it was a personal hatred between him and Maliki, and this reflected on the street. I also can call it a game of kids. I'm sorry to say that, but it's
absolutely
it's exactly it's absolutely what's happening now.
I think too. I mean, I think too that one of the main reasons.
All right, I love it when two brains work together.
Sorry.
But let me be the conversation traffic cop here. Lahib, go ahead, and then Amar, come back to you. Lahib, go ahead.
Sorry. Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to give some more context. Amar is absolutely right that this is what is playing out now is really the tensions between Sadr and Maliki. But really the trigger of it is what happened in the few days and the few weeks prior to him calling for the first demonstration on Wednesday. And that was first an audio leak from a supposed conversation between Maliki and someone where he is literally accusing Sadr of plotting state takeover. And then the second thing the so-called framework parties, so the other Shia parties that are on the other side of Sadr that form the so-called Shia coordination framework, they decided
this is hard to follow in a very short conversation. What's the main point you want to make in a sentence before I move on? Go ahead.
The main point is that they nominated a prime ministerial candidate, Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, that is rejected by Sadr. And would they not have done that, we might not have seen this escalation. They thought that they could count out Sadr from the political process.
Got it. I am going to go back to Amr via his Twitter account, which is, well, this is a historic picture. Got a chance to sit on the main table of Parliament Speaker. I sat silently in the middle of huge chaos. In that chaos, in this perhaps people's revolution, are you hearing suggestions, ideas for government reform?
Well, I have, that was a funny moment anyway, but I have got so many comments, honestly, even on my Facebook feeding. And unfortunately, no one is telling me to go ahead. I mean, many said yes, but the majority of people said, this is the corrupt position. Please, we want you this way.
Amr, do they want you to run for office? Could you be the solution to Iraq's issues?
I will definitely make solution for the country if I am ready. But it's impossible. Unfortunately, I would say the majority of the people who actually educated enough, who has the sense of responsibility for their own people, they are not running. This is one of our problems in Iraq. The good people, they just stay far from like election. Yeah. It's not easy to convince them because they feel it's dominated by corrupted, influential.
I hear that. That's not uncommon with politics globally, but particularly for Iraq, I understand for this particular moment where can't get a prime minister right now. I have one thought here, Raed, and I hope you will help us just wrap up the show with this. What is the best case scenario for Iraq right now? Is a question that comes from YouTube watching this discussion. Raed, thoughts?
I mean, the answer will take 2 hours, but in a nutshell, I would say the best case scenario.
How about 2 minutes? I'm giving you 2 minutes, Raed. Can you do it?
I can. That's my job. I'm like a talking head in DC. So I would say, like in 2 minutes, what Iraqis have been asking for the last 2 decades is very clear. It's not confusing. It's not utopian. Iraqi Sunnis and Shia and Christians and Kurds have been asking for clear demands to end corruption and sectarianism in the country. There are very clear roadmaps out there that were published over and over again by multiple Iraqi civil society and political leaders. And listening to what the Iraqi people want is the best case scenario. Ending the sectarian divisions and quota system is the best case scenario. Getting rid of the corrupt politicians who get paid tens of thousands of dollars a month without living in the country is the best case scenario. The best case scenario is very clear. And the roadmap to move Iraq in the right direction is clear. And I think the powers to be, who are supported by Iran and the US and sometimes Saudi Arabia and Israel and other neighboring countries, they have to let go. They have to let go of controlling the country for their own special interests and move away and move aside and let Iraqis rule their country the way that will actually represent the will of the majority.
Okay, right. And Amr and Lahi, thank you so much. Right now, in the current news cycle for Al Jazeera, we are covering the sitting in Parliament in Iraq's Parliament building. And now you've had some added information how to understand that situation much better. Let me give you one more place to visit, and that is the Twitter accounts of our 3 guests, Raed, Amr, and Lahib. Thank you for your conversations and your questions on YouTube. I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Take care, everybody.